Well, welcome to the show, You, Me, and Your Mom, a show where three people sit down and talk about whatever they want to talk about. I'm your host, Eric, and we're joined today by our other two hosts, my best friend, Brandon.
Happy Candle Nights.
And my mom.
Merry Christmas.
Her name is Sandy. We also have a special guest we'll introduce in just a moment. Her name is Savannah, but we'll give you more details in a second. But before we do that, how is everybody doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I jumped in for that to save us from that awkward pause yet again.
It's only been a year and you guys still haven't figured this out. It's great.
Well, that's
I
because
could
we were
establish
polite.
some sort of order, but at this point it's tradition.
You know, we covered this in the production meeting that I had in a really great dream a few days ago, and then I realized that didn't actually happen. But I made some great points. We should talk later.
We should maybe make some notes next time you have a dream. So I'm doing very well, thank you. So it's been a good week, and I've been looking at the Christmas star, which is not a Christmas star. It's two planets aligning, apparently. I've just been informed, but I knew that already. But I'm going to pretend that it was a Christmas star because it's Christmas week, even though there was no new baby Jesus 800 years ago when they last met in this particular zone. But we're there with that. We're down with that.
I feel there was a lot of passive aggressiveness directed toward your son.
Once every 800 years, a baby Jesus is born.
I made the mistake.
Well, it really did align like this in 7 BC, and maybe, but it's not really a star. I'm there with you on that, and it probably didn't go over the manger. But it's kind of nice to think that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I never can have my nice little fantasies with Eric. But
cool story,
whatever. It's okay.
Welcome to Eric Ruins Everything You Love.
Well, we've established very much I do that.
yeah. It's like I can't have anything nice.
You're like, this is why I can't have anything nice, Eric. It's you.
It's you. You know, when you were little, I was thinking, he'll grow up and then I'll have nice things. No, I can't even have a Christmas star. So.
Instead of it being all for you, Damien, it's all because of you, Eric.
That's right. Yeah, there was an omen the year he was born, and it looked very much like not the Christmas star. So anyway, that's how I'm doing. How are you, Brandon?
I'm doing all right. It is, as we're recording this, 3 days before Christmas, and tomorrow is my wife's big family baking day. Usually on Christmas, their whole extended family gets together, and her dad is one of 8, so there's quite a few of us who live nearby and come in from not so nearby, and sometimes even further away, like Florida and Tennessee. So it's always fun, but this year with COVID restrictions, not so much. But they're still getting together to do the big baking. Usually at the end of breakfast, everyone leaves with like a box of cookies, and they do that. So they're still getting together and doing it. Everyone's, been safe and quarantining and making sure that they're not infected themselves. And they'll go and bake tomorrow and basically do some deliveries. So I'm looking forward to that. And because it's, the night before baking day and my wife is making cinnamon rolls tomorrow, my kitchen is filled with the smell of fresh paint.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because what else would it smell like at Christmas time?
I did see her pictures early on Facebook, and it looks good. It looks good. It looks bright and cheerful.
Yeah, she's got a nice mellow mint color. It's still a little bright because we're covering over yellow, and it's a paint that doesn't need primer, so it'll be a little more mellow after the second coat. And then she's got some great vintage wallpaper that she's going to put up on one accent wall, so we're excited for that.
Well, I couldn't help but think of mint ice cream, which is, I don't know if that's what you were going for, but it made me happy, and that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
So, Savannah, how are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well.
Good. And I'm doing pretty well down here as well. And so for those that are listening, let me quickly introduce a friend of the podcast. This is the first time we've had her on our show. We're very excited to have her. Her name is Savannah. And Savannah has a hobby that's extremely interesting. Savannah is a D&D game master, and we thought we'd have her on and kind of take us through what Dungeons and Dragons is and how does it work and how do we do it in the time of something like COVID. And so Savannah has lots of experience with this. She started, I think, about a year or so ago. Did I get that correct? And it has, her game and her friends have grown, and this is something that she does on the side. And we just thought her story was fascinating, so we asked her to join us. So we're going to be asking questions with her and just kind of getting to know about it. And if this is something of interest for our listeners, how they can get involved with Dungeons and Dragons. We also have someone who's deeply in Dungeons and Dragons as well, our local resident, Brandon, who's also very much in Dungeons and Dragons as well. So here we go. So Savannah, why don't you kind of give us a background a little bit of how you got involved into Dungeons and Dragons? What drew you to it? When did you get involved? And that sort of thing. Just kind of give us a background. Oh, and before you do, maybe we should probably I was about to do it. I was about to skip this really important part, but maybe we should talk a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons. I thought maybe between Savannah and Brandon, you kind of give us an idea of what Dungeons and Dragons do, because there's this misnomer of what it is that's been perpetuated for since the 70s, about we're calling real spells in and demons are going to come in, and it's nothing like that at all. So I was wondering if you kind of explain to us what you're doing and how it works before we get into your story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, is a tabletop role-playing game. The very basic gist of it is you and your friends sit down at a table or meet up over Zoom in this day and age. And there's one person who is the dungeon master or game master, aka DM or GM, who, sets up a story and sets up scenarios, and every other person is playing a character. And you have like stats and a character sheet. And the DM or GM describes something. And then the person playing the character says, okay, well, my character is going to do this. And then sometimes, depending on what it is, they roll dice. And then depending on the dice roll, they see if they're successful doing that thing or not. And that can literally be anything as simple as like, I walk into the room, what's in the room? And the GM is like, oh, there's a chest in the room, it's locked. And then the player says, okay, well, my character is going to pick the lock and open the chest. It's stuff like that. And basically through that, you tell a whole story. Like, it can be a story, it can be something really simple, or it can be something, that takes place over, collectively kind of over like months to years, that is as epic and as broad as like Lord of the Rings.
Gotcha.
But it doesn't have to be that, but it could be. And so it's basically just a game that is kind of a collective storytelling experience. And it has nothing to do with real world religion or any real world, witchcraft or anything like that.
Right.
There's
Maybe not the way you play.
Brandon. It's interesting to me when you talk about the story, and I happen to know a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons. Now, Dungeons and Dragons, its most famous environment is fantasy, but there's also, for those that are listening who are not familiar with it, role-playing takes all kinds of forms. I was watching one role-playing game where they were playing as high school students in a high school, and that was their game.
Yep.
And they had a great time doing it. So it's all kinds of environments. I'm sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
No, you're fine. There was one, I don't know if it was that game specifically that you saw, but I was supposed to play test the game once upon a time, but could never find the actual room that it was happening in. It got removed and details didn't get posted. But I think it was called High School Drama. Mm-hmm. And basically you were in like a Dawson's Creek type scenario, or, maybe if the DM wanted to get a little spicy, you could turn it into like kind of like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer type universe, but you were primarily focused on being a teenager and just how, I think there was, you had to roll for like how much your hormones were interacting with your rational mind.
That's amazing.
Are you sure this is teenager and not menopausal woman one?
Well, you can easily homebrew it.
Okay.
So like D&D Big Mouth.
Pretty much, yeah. It was basically like, well, I want to try and reconcile with my girlfriend. It's like, well, you're still pretty heated up from gym class when, the jock picked on you. Let's see if, your anger and frustration levels are going to allow that, whether you're going to be clear-minded enough to do this or whether you're going to completely make the situation worse. And so it was just a really fun turn on it. You can get into some interesting scenarios.
Right.
So that's pretty funny.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask Savannah a question. That's D&D. So tell me what a DM or a GM, what that's like, what they do. What is your role in this?
Yeah. So I, as the GM, you are kind of you're the storyteller, but you're also the chaperone, more or less.
Yeah.
So you... Yeah, really. So I spend the vast majority of my time when I'm working on D&D stuff, the vast majority of my time is actually planning, not playing. And so I'm writing the story. I'm preparing fights that the party's going to get into. I'm building dungeons and preparing stuff that they're going to encounter and run into. And I spend so much time like writing all of that, and then my players show up and they interact with those things, and half of my plot and half of all the things that I planned falls apart, but that's okay, because then I build up based on what they want to do, because it's ultimately our story that we're all telling together. I'm not just telling them a story. They are creating the story. I'm just setting up prompts for it.
So it sounds kind of like a collaborative choose your own adventure kind of thing.
Oh yeah, exactly. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's definitely a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, one of the ways that I kind of describe it to people sometimes is that I say, think of like an outline. I have the Roman numerals that have to happen, and I might have some plot points under that I want to happen and probably need to happen at some point that aren't as pressing and might be able to be rearranged. But if you try to go lower than that, then you're really kind of railroading and making the players do what you want them to do and not really giving them free rein. A good dungeon master or game master is really able to just kind of read the group and prepare some things that could happen and have some contingency plans. I know that I usually have a document with just like 20 random characters already created for them to run into in a dark alley or the tavern or things like that, and another name of like 30 streets, because then sometimes your campaign likes to get snarky. It's, what's the name of the street we're on? Willow. Where did we just come from? Oak. And we turned east onto that? Sure, why not? So it's you want to have, like I said, kind of those big bullet points that need to happen, and then just be able to play fast and loose in between.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely an art to it, I think.
Savannah, you mentioned something about your players asking you, can they do this? Could you explain a little bit more to those that are not familiar with how roles work and how character traits work and all that good stuff? Would you mind taking a moment and explain what that means? Buffs and debuffs and all that.
Yeah, so everyone who is a player, except for the DM, of course, has a character that they play, and they play this character at every session, unless their character dies. And their character is, you pick a race and a class, and this is for D&D only. Other tabletop role-playing games, might have something set up differently. But in D&D, you pick your race, so that's, pretty much all your fantasy races that you can think of. So like human, elf, dwarf,
Dragonborn.
Yeah, Dragonborn.
Gnomes.
You want gnomes? Do you want to be a centaur?
Do you want to be a cat person or an elephant person?
Yeah, the elephant person is a new one. That one's kind of funky.
Yeah.
But you pick that first, and then that kind of plays a little bit of a role in like your stats. And then you pick your class, and your class is the most important part. Your class determines what your role in the game and in the group is and what you can do. So you can basically either be, kind of like a martial type fighter, or you can be a spellcaster. And within both of those groups, there's a couple different types. What kind of fighter do you want to be? Do you want to do ranged spell? Do you want to like fight from a range and shoot arrows and be a ranger, or do you want to just hit stuff really hard and be a fighter or a barbarian? Or if you want to cast spells, do you want to be the type that heals and is a cleric, or do you want to summon nature, be a druid? You can shapeshift as a druid, or do you just want to be a standard wizard? Stuff like that. And then based on all that determines what you can do in the game. And then also you get to pick you usually roll dice for it depending on how you want to play, but you pick kind of like a basic, what's the word I'm looking for?
Array of statistics.
Yeah, like a bunch of statistics. And so this is like strength, intelligence, constitution, which is basically health, wisdom, charisma, and I think there's one more, dexterity. And so based on all those things, that, determines what your character is good at. And then so if you say, okay, well, I want to pick the lock, then based on that, the DM might say, okay, make a dexterity check. And based on how good your character is at, dexterity, will they be able to physically, pick this lock or not? Are they clumsy? Do they have butterfingers, or are they, really good at this kind of stuff? So,
yeah.
And so that kind of just all determines, how the game goes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Another fun that's part of it is when you're setting up the character, you also kind of choose what kind of person they are. There's a term called alignment, which is kind of a 3x3 grid, and it's from good, chaotic, or good, neutral, and evil, and lawful, chaotic, or lawful, neutral, and chaotic. Ugh. So if you have someone who's lawful neutral, that's someone who's like the most upstanding, always does right no matter what it costs him. He could lay down his life to, stop a coin purse who is running down the street if he gets the wrong rolls. And then you could go all the way to chaotic evil, who is just kind of like the Joker from Batman. He just does evil because it's fun for him, no rhyme or reason. He doesn't necessarily have to gain from it. It could even be of detriment to him, but he doesn't care because that's what he lives for. And so you just kind of pick where your character falls in between that. And it even goes a little further, things like bonds and flaws, which are kind of principles your person lives by. Like if you have a thief character, one of the flaws might be, if I see something valuable, I immediately plan on how I'm going to steal it, even if it gets in the way of my other goals. So you never want to make a perfect character. You can always tell someone who's playing D&D for the first time because they always know what to say in the situation, even if they have low charisma, or they're just going to go barging into the room with the sword drawn first, even if they're kind of the weakest character, and their character can do everything so perfectly and awesomely. And once you get playing, you realize it's more fun to play a flawed character and something that's more real, even in a fantasy setting.
Yeah. So now we've kind of got a basis because we've talked about what it is, we've talked about what you do as the game master, and we talked about what the players do. How does it practically look like in real life? Like if I sat down, I was like, all right, we're going to play. What can we expect? So can we talk about a little bit what it's normally what it looks like in real life? Like I know what it's going to be. It's going to be a table and that sort of thing. But what does it look like in the time of COVID where we can't meet and because we're having to socially distance? So what does that look like? Like what do someone playing for the very first time expect to come into a room or come into a Zoom meeting?
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about how, I fit the game into, playing like digitally because of COVID, or do you want to talk about like what a game normally looks like?
Well, we
Like
can talk
once you
about
start
both if you
playing?
like. Yeah, why don't we
Yeah.
talk about both? And the reason why is because we do have a vaccination now, and then sooner or later, life will get back to normal. So why don't we talk a little bit about what it's supposed to look like versus what you've adapted it to? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what it's supposed to look like is usually, just a bunch of people sitting around a table. The DM usually has, like a little stand covering up, their notes and stuff, secrets and spoilers that they don't want the players to see. And basically, you have your characters, you have your dice, and the DM, like me, I'll say, okay, the three of you walk into a room. The room is dusty and old, and there is a treasure chest in the middle of the room. What do you do? What do you do?
I would roll for perception, but that's because I know how to play.
Yeah.
So I
Some
would
people
be an
say, I
avid.
open the chest and get
Yeah.
stabbed. Some people would say, I check for traps, or I pick the lock, or, sense evil or detect magic.
Right.
Or I want to turn that beetle in the corner into a sheep, because sometimes people get distracted and they really like using a new spell called polymorph. It happens.
Sure. So
Polymorph is my favorite spell. Just as an aside, it's my favorite spell because at some point you basically can just turn yourself into a T-Rex, which I think is pretty rad.
Okay, that's it. I have
As
to
long
play
as you've
now.
seen, as
I
long
have
as
to
you've
play.
seen
Right?
one, as long as you've seen one.
Even the,
I can just hear I can just hear my rules lawyer, former DM. Have you seen a dire warg? Yeah, it was
yes,
totally down the other path when we took the right way.
yes.
That's
You'd
why
had the
we didn't
day
go
I
left.
had. That's right.
Yeah, so okay, so this is a fun one. So say you're a novice player and you've never played before, and you're like, okay, I go to open the chest. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you go to open the chest, and the chest opens as soon as you touch it, and it bites your arm. You are being attacked by a mimic. Roll for initiative. You have to fight this thing now.
Right.
And then you guys all have to beat up on a treasure chest that is alive and trying to bite your arm off.
And when she says roll for initiative, that's basically rolling to see the turn order for the battle that's about to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So normally it's around a table, but what do you do in the time of like this where we're having to socially distance? What steps have you taken to change that, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, so what I do now, and a lot of people do this differently, but what I do and what I know a lot of other people do is we play over Zoom, which is really easy because, you know, you can see everyone's facial expressions, and everyone can like talk at the same time, which is really useful and good for like, you know, like camaraderie and stuff. And then, so we'll have Zoom open, and then there's several websites that do this, but the website that my friends and I use is called Roll20. And that has all of the D&D specific stuff up there, like the character sheets. And we mostly use it for the battle maps. So in person, you know, you can use like a whiteboard, or you know, some people who are really into it make these like really intricate dioramas that sit on the table, and everyone has little little figurines. They're called minis, and those are their characters. And there's also enemy minis, and they, you know, move them around on the board on the map in battles and stuff. But online we have what we use is called Roll20, and so it's basically, you know, that but on a screen. And we use that, and we like move our little characters icons around as they fight and do stuff. And yeah, that's pretty much what we do. And then there's other little tips and tricks you can do. Like at my table, at my virtual table, we use Spotify a lot for music, which really helps with immersion, because Spotify has these, you can do group sessions.
Sure.
So I will start a group session on Spotify, and just send the link to my friends, and then we can all listen to the same music, and I'll just play, you know, battle music, or, you know, ambient music for whatever town they're in, which is really helpful because it really helps, you know, kind of add to the immersion into the game, even though we're all, you know, so far apart.
I don't know why I love the idea that you have a Spotify Dungeons and Dragons playlist so much, but it's the best thing I've heard all day.
Oh, I have several. Name a situation, I've got a playlist for it.
We've got the tavern mix, we have the forest mix, we have the slimy cave mix, we have the volcano mix.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's absolutely.
I have 2 tavern mixes. I have a chill tavern mix, and then I have what I like to call tavern music that's off the shits, and that's tavern music for when a fight starts.
Yes.
Which is what happened in our last game.
That's amazing. Absolutely.
Within minutes of them walking in, they started a fight in the tavern. So
That's amazing. I would love to see that. Absolutely. So now that we kind of got a foundation for those that are listening, they don't know D&D very well, let's have some fun. First of all, how in the world did you get involved in this? Was this something that you fell into, or is this something like a deliberate thing that you kind of headed towards, if that makes sense?
I absolutely fell into it. So I'm in vet school. I'm in vet school at the University of Tennessee, and I'm in my 4th year now. But my first year, it was the first semester of vet school. You know, I was still meeting new people, and my roommate got invited to play D&D with some other people. and I had never played before, and she invited me to go with her, and I was like, okay, cool, sounds great. So we went, and we ended up playing with that group of friends for a couple months, and we all had a ton of fun. We really liked it. I will admit, I was the worst D&D player you've ever seen. This is my formal apology to everyone who played with me. I was the one who always avoided fights because I always thought I was going to die. I didn't know how to role play because no one really explained it to me. I never read the player's handbook, which is basically the rule book,
Right.
and I never cared to learn anything. I was just so unhelpful, and just I was the worst player, and I'm so sorry. But and I liked it, but yeah, I liked it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had a player like that in my first group, but it was because it was like my best friend's 13-year-old brother. So, of course, it's like, I'm going to cut off his head. And then the next 3 hours would just be like bailing us out of whatever crap Ethan just got us into.
Oh, yeah. Our group definitely got into shenanigans like that. Someone ended up on trial because they accidentally killed a cabbage seller.
Like
cabbages.
I know I was about to make
cabbages. Yeah.
Avatar. Beat me to it.
Oh yeah. And we never shut up about that. That character was a cat person because in D&D you can play crazy races.
Oh, yeah.
And she she lost that trial and she got her tail cut off. So that's D&D for you. Weird stuff happens. But so that game we played for a while, and it kind of fizzled out just because vet school was really hard and we all got really busy. And then last year I actually kind of, I don't want to say on accident, but just on a whim because someone recommended it to me, I started a podcast called The Adventure Zone, which is a live play D&D podcast by these 3 comedians who are all brothers and their dad. And it's one of the most popular D&D podcasts out there. And it's phenomenal. I absolutely love it. And when I listen to it, I recommend everyone listen to it.
Absolutely.
But when I heard it, I was like, oh, wow, D&D is so much more than I thought it could be. Cause I wasn't super into it before. And just listening to that podcast just kind of opened a whole new way of thinking about it. And just kind of really set off my imagination. And this year, I started playing with some of my friends again and had a little bit of a group going with vet school. But then right after the pandemic hit in March, one of my best friends from back home, she called me and she was like, hey, because she was one of the people who had recommended the podcast to me. She was like, hey, I know we've been talking about it for a little while since you started that podcast, but I really think we should start a D&D campaign now. We've got nothing better to do. And I was like, I'm on it. And that started the current campaign that we're playing right now. It's me and a bunch of my friends, and we all live in different states. So even once the pandemic's over, we're still going to be playing over Zoom.
Right.
But there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, it's awesome because my friends and I have been able to connect more and better because of this game. It's even though it's a game that, it's an awesome way to tell a story and have fun, you do get a lot closer to the people that you're playing with. Even if they're your best friends and you're really close to them already, I think it just adds an extra layer of, bonding to your friends and stuff. Because you're experiencing the story together and no one else gets to experience the story like you do. And that's something that's really special, I think. Yeah. I kind of ended up going down a little bit of a tangent there, but that's how I started playing D&D. And now I'm a DM.
Lovely. That's actually a really lovely story because I was actually going to ask you kind of along the lines of basically what you get out of it. Why do you find it so much fun? And it sounds like you already kind of answered that a little bit when you were talking about, bonding with your friends. You're all best buds anyway, but this adds another layer of friendship because you went through a story that's special and unique to just your group. You share that, and nobody else in the whole world shares that with you. It's something unique to you guys. So I think it's awesome. It sounded also, would you agree that it's something along the lines of you get to create something, that satisfaction of creating something that's yours? That would be a good way to put it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, and I've always been a creative person. I mostly like visual art. I've always been into drawing and painting and stuff. But this is one of the few times that I feel like I've been able to create something. And not only is it like a collaborative creation, but it's something where I create it and I know that it is actively being like consumed and enjoyed in a way that is meaningful to my friends.
Right.
So in a way, like my D&D campaign is kind of a love letter to my friends where I'm like, I love you guys so much that I made this entire immersive world for us to escape to. When 2020 and the whole world is on fire, it's okay. We can go be our silly little D&D characters and fight goblins or whatever,
It's very cathartic.
So,
yeah. Absolutely wholesome about fighting trolls together. I that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's fantastic.
Well, I'm going to go off on what Brandon just said. It's very cathartic. So I couldn't help but think, because of my background, I couldn't help but think some of the things that I do in therapy sometimes is psychodrama. So I will have the clients create characters and then fantasize what would, they would step through these adventures and things like that, kind of role play like that. And what you're describing sounds like there may be some of that. And then Brandon, I was thinking that, and then Brandon, you said it's cathartic. So I'm wondering, Savannah, is that something you could speak to for us?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I have literally heard of therapists using D&D in their therapy sessions. And it's absolutely something that can be cathartic. And it's kind of crazy if you have, even just a little bit of self-awareness, you realize that your characters and the things that they go through are really just a reflection of like you and sometimes the things that you go through. And that can be kind of wild. And the things that, really impact you come through your D&D character. And as your characters, confronted with challenges and difficult situations and moral dilemmas and stuff, it really kind of, what am I trying to say? It reflects on like who you are, whether you realize it or not. And so you can kind of, D&D is in a weird way, a way that you can kind of do some like self-discovery and sit back and be like, oh, that's why my character reacted to that situation like that. That was actually me. Right. Or you sit back and you're like, okay, I wrote this like horrible, this like crazy backstory for this character. Oh, wait, that's something that I kind of went through. And then you have to like work through it as your D&D character. And then like you end up, it's very cathartic in that way because you kind of end up like thinking through it in real life. Does that make sense? And so, as much as it is, fun, escapist fantasy game, it's also a way that you can kind of you kind of set aside the things that you need to deal with, but also like deal with them in a way that you can manage, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Total sense. Thank you.
It's kind of funny, not funny, but it's as someone who just loves people watching and is fascinated by humanity. It's always kind of fun to watch first-time players create their characters because they don't realize they're creating a reflection of themselves. And especially when you have someone like for instance, the first time I played, I made a halfling rogue because I am 6'4". I weigh upwards of 300 pounds. My hands are about 8 to 9 inches from the tip of my middle finger to the base of my palm. I wanted to play something small and sneaky because I've never had that opportunity. I have never played a giant barbarian. That's what I do in real life without trying. I've kind of made it a point my whole life to, know how to step without making noise, or, make sure when I'm going upstairs or downstairs, it doesn't sound like there's three people going up or downstairs. And it's just things like that. And just watching different characters I've played throughout, the past 10 years since I've been playing, it's like, yeah, I can see what I was going through at that point in my life with that character, and when I started playing that character. And it's just really kind of interesting to see how people go from game to game. And then the more you play and the more you're kind of aware of that, then you can really have fun and just start to create the most outlandish characters possible. One of the people in my group right now is a gnome artificer, so he's just a genius who's 18 inches tall, but he sounds like a pirate. and just does anything for money and knowledge, basically.
Yeah.
I think he's lawful evil, because he's just concerned about how he makes, how he can improve on his designs, and could care less about anything else.
Okay. Well, that makes me think of a question to ask y'all. So, speaking of humans and the humanity of D&D, and when you pull in 5 or 6 people, they all have their own self-reflection journey that they're going through, right? And they all have their ideas on how this may play out. Can you tell me an interesting story / funny story or series story, or something that was really significant to you, something that happened while you were playing that stuck with you? It could be funny, it could be serious, whatever you guys want, but something that stuck out to you, an interesting moment or a crazy moment or whatever that may be. Kind of give us a flavor of what's it like to actually be in a session, if that makes sense.
Sure. Do you want to go first, Savannah, or do you want time to think?
I have several ideas, and I can't pick one right off the top of my head, so you can go first.
Apparently.
Sure. So do you want something that's more reflective, that really resonated with me, like at the time, that was kind of serious, or do you just want like a fun anecdote? I've got tons of both.
Yeah, I was going to say, anything you want to go, just fire away. Give us what you got, man.
Okay, so one of my favorite campaigns that I ever did, it was just a one-shot 4-hour session at a convention, and it was basically Ocean's 11 in the D&D universe. Now, it was built for 6 characters, and they pre-make the characters for you. You're like, okay, this is a half-elf wizard. These are the spells she knows. This is her background story. They give you everything, so you don't have to waste any of that 4 hours creating anything. It's all pre-made for you. And so, like I said, it was built for 6 characters, but unfortunately 2 of them didn't show up. So we made it work. We basically had 3 days to figure out how to rob this casino. There was like a wedding going on at the time, and there was a special security robot that was basically like a giant golem, or a warforged, as they're called in Dungeons and Dragons, and just all these different things that we had to figure out ahead of time. And it was so great because it really was, 2.5 days of planning for, a 1-hour quote execution in this world. And so we had to research where this robot came from and find the tinker and find out, oh, okay, so it responds to the voice of the owner of the casino. There were special badges that we had to find to get us through security checkpoints, because even when, our druid, wizard, one of our spellcasters, created these duplicates, they were actually magically spelled, so that if you go past a barrier without, one of the spelled ones from the casino itself, it set off an alarm. Just different things like that. And we got, and there were big parts that we'd missed that other groups had done. One thing that's always kind of fun for game masters in scenarios like that, when they're doing the same module, multiple times in a few days span, they said, okay, well, this is how this group did it. Apparently there was this large, basically dump truck or garbage truck that would go past every day that a lot of people used to haul the gold out. So what we did was, there's a spell that you can basically mimic someone's voice. So we got down into the vault area, and as soon as he came through with his guards, we cast Zone of Silence on them so they can't make any sound. Our spellcaster mimicked his voice and told the giant robot that was also part flamethrower to roast the intruders, killed the casino owner and his guards, and then just had 5 hours while there was a wedding going on upstairs to get like $500,000 gold out through basically bags of holding, which is kind of like a bowling bag with an infinite bottom. So it was just one of the most fun things that we've ever done, just trying to put all the pieces together. And
Right.
it's like, okay, well, the chef is this giant ratkin, and how are we going to have to get him out, because he's the one who really knows what's going on. So we
Right.
ended up having to fake food poisoning. So he was brought out into the dining room and was being berated and publicly shamed. And it was one of the most fun things I've ever done.
Well,
Meanwhile,
go ahead. Go
Back
ahead.
at the ranch.
meanwhile, so you can have a heist like that where everyone knows what they're doing and everyone's planning, or you can have a heist like my players did,
Oh, no.
where they had an art heist, and it was during an art auction, and the auctioneer was, walking back and forth from the art vault to the stage, as he was bringing pieces of art out and auctioning them off. And the party, my players, found the auctioneer. They locked him in a bathroom, convinced him that there was a plot out. There was, people were planning to murder him, so they were putting him in the bathroom for safekeeping. And then they went and found the guy who was selling the art piece that they wanted to steal. They threw just a bunch of crazy natural 20s, which, so long story short, for those of you who don't know much about D&D, the main dice that you roll is a 20-sided dice. But depending on what you roll depends, kind of gauges how well you're able to do
depending
something.
on the difficulty. If you're trying to do something really hard, the game master might say, okay, we'll roll the 20-sided die and you have to roll at least a 16, if it's really difficult. If it's something that's, pretty basic, it's, maybe a 5 or a 10, not too difficult. But, sorry, go on, Savannah.
Oh, yeah. And so if you roll a 20, it's an automatic win. If you roll a 1, it's an automatic fail, and something really funny happens. So they rolled a 20 and convinced the guy who was selling his art piece that they wanted to go look at it before he sold it, to see if it was really, that valuable and how much money they wanted to put down on it, blah, blah, blah. They took this guy, past all these guards that I had set up for the fight and all these traps that I had set up for them to sneak.
We got far this time. Savannah, can you hear me?
I had set up like all this stuff for them, and I was like, okay. And they managed to do it, and they got all the way back to the vault. And then one of the spellcasters cast hold person on the guy who was selling his art, who, by the way, I should mention, was basically fantasy Joe Exotic. because this was like April, and Tiger King had just come out, and I just wanted to be like a really shady, really terrible character.
Sure.
So fantasy
Why'd you
Joe
pick
Exotic.
such a lovable creature as Joe Exotic for character?
I called him the Dragon King. He had a farm of dragons, and a reputation that preceded him. But he was so terrible. And so they cast hold person on the Dragon King, so he was paralyzed and he could not move. And then they were like, oh, should I throw a jar of angry bees at him, or should we just take the statue and run? And they decided to throw the bees. They threw the bees at him. This poor man is paralyzed, and there's a swarm of bees attacking him. They leave with the statue, and as they're leaving, fantasy Joe Exotic, the Dragon King, is just like, I'm never gonna financially recover from this.
That's brilliant.
That's the best ever.
That was great.
Well played.
We recently just finished a campaign that the last half of it could basically be described as Mad Max in hell. And I was playing a cleric, which is basically a holy warrior, who is generally a healer and stays on the side of light. But the fun thing is, when you're in hell, you can, make a lot of morally relativistic decisions about how you want to deal with people, because they're in hell, they're bad, so you don't have to worry about what you're doing to them, right? That doesn't make you a bad person. And so I was playing this water elemental character, and at one point, as we were leveling up, I have this spell called create create and shape water, which I would basically use it like a waterbender from Avatar. And I was also, there's a inflict wound is like the offensive spell that clerics have, because like I said, they're mostly healers and protectors and buffers. They strengthen their teammates. So I rolled a 20 on my attack roll, and we were fighting against this boss that we'd just been basically hounded by for the past few sessions, and was just such an annoyance. And we were finally like taking the fight to him after whittling off enough of his forces that we wouldn't be killed outright. And so I just walk up to him, and because with inflict wound you have to make physical contact, it's not a ranged spell, you can't use it from far away. And I rolled the 20, and my dungeon master just looks at me and says, well, why don't you narrate how you're going to kill him, because he didn't have that much health left. And I said, I take my finger and I put it right between his eyes, and I pull every bit of moisture from his body.
Oh my god.
And everyone just explodes like, what is going on? And I was like, I had a bunch of really annoying calls today, so I'm imagining a few of my clients right now.
Oh my god.
Oh,
And you can let out some darkness.
See how that would be cathartic. Yeah.
Like I said.
Yeah, one of my friends who the one who started the bar fight in the most recent session that we had, there was a drunk barbarian who was like haggling her, who was like, hey, come buy me a drink, little girl, blah blah. And she just walked straight up to him and just punched him in the face. Like, she was like, that felt really great. Yeah.
It's amazing.
I need that in real life sometimes.
Hey, I'm right here, Mom. Brandon, wasn't it you that like took their blood and swirled it around? And
oh yeah, so it was that character. So
yeah.
I had
Oh,
well, originally there was this character that we had killed, and he was a character called an Eladrin, which are kind of like right under demigods, and it was just the most ridiculous chain of events that he died because he shouldn't have, but he did, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
the dungeon master is at the whim of the rolls of the die just as much as the characters. Well, that's not true, they're allowed to cheat a little bit, but still our dungeon master plays a very fun and creative game. So we had this dead body that we were basically going to use for parts, because that's what happens sometimes in Dungeons and Dragons. And we just wanted to study him. My character was a cleric, and my thing was that I knew how to heal so well because I had come in contact with all these different races and different illnesses. I was basically like a traveling medic before meeting up with the party. And so I was like, I really want to study this Eladrin because we never have. Well, we didn't think about the fact that we're leaving him in a giant metal tank in the middle of the desert in hell. So when you come back 18 hours later, it's just a pile of goo. So I said, hold on. So can I just kind of like, let me use my water, shape water to clean out this whole compartment so we're not just riding around in this nasty smelling of death tin can, because we had no other option. And I was about to throw the remains out of the side of the dune buggy, basically, and then I realized, wait a second, I want to turn this into a giant ball. And they look at me and they're like, what? And I said, no, I just want to make this into a giant chum sphere, basically. And my dungeon master starts cackling madly. He's like, yes, that's perfect. And like a few minutes later, we passed into the 9th circle of hell, basically, where it's frozen. So I had a giant frozen chum sphere that I was using like a wrecking ball, that like as I would, kill more enemies, I would basically add their viscera to it.
Just the picture of that is
God.
amazing. You guys are so imaginative. Yeah.
Well, when you're playing in hell, it's like you've been in a Bosch painting for like, and we just finished that campaign after 15 months.
Right.
Folks, if you're not familiar with the painter Bosch, Hieronymus Bosch, he did some weird jacked up portraits of hell. But that's, you get into some weird mind spaces sometimes.
and it's not all like gruesome.
Oh no, not at all.
Too.
That is one of the most that is one of the worst, in quotes, grossest things I've ever done. One of the best things I ever did. Another campaign, I was a druid and we had just reached level 20. So druids can shapeshift, like Savannah had mentioned earlier, into beast forms. And when you reach level 20, you can cast your spells in your beast form. Otherwise, you have to turn back into your, halfling or human or whatever race body that you have. So we found out that there is basically this giant meeting of like 20 different orc clans, which never happens in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. They're very tribalistic and they don't play well with each other. But this was pretty serious.
If you want.
Yeah, if you
They
want.
don't have to be, but if you
they
want.
don't have to be, but in that set.
Yeah.
In that module that we were playing, they were. And so this was kind of a big deal. And so I basically flew in my Falcon form, and I looked at the map, and my dungeon master had put all of them in a row, which I had been using lightning spells throughout this whole game, and lightning spells travel in a straight line. There is one that kind of bounces around, but druids don't have that one. But so I fly in and I look at him and I just go, "Oh, Dungeon Master, is that really how they're situated?" And he looks down and said a word that began with the letter F. And I rolled my dice, and because I was coming in as a sneak attack, basically I got 2 actions. So I flew in and spent all of these extra bonus dice that I got through different add-ons and spells and abilities that you get as you level up each, every time in your character. And I basically threw down like 30 dice worth of damage on all these guys. And I said, okay, so they're all dead on one side. And because I got a second action, druids have this other great spell called Summon Animal, I believe, or Conjure Animal. Okay. And at a certain level, you can pull up more and more of them. So I'm like, and I want to summon 32 Spirit Panthers to dispatch of the other orcs. So we literally... And we had a flying airship because, of course, we did. These things just happened. So basically, all these orcs see is just this weird, like, giant floating blimp. A bird comes out. There's a crackle. There's this weird, like, explosion and flash. Then they hear snarling, and out walks... What was I playing? Oh, out walks, like, this halfling druid holding the head of the orc chieftain and one of the remaining, like, the last remaining orc chieftain that we left alive to basically be, like, our mouthpiece. It's like, look, you saw what happened to the other 19, so unless you want to join them, you're on our side now.
It's amazing. And it's funny because you guys are so imaginative, but one of the first times I ever played, and I'll show you kind of like the different mindsets, for those who are listening, different mindsets. It doesn't have to be as big as what Brandon and Savannah are talking about. It can be something simple and kind of funny. So one of the first times I ever played, I didn't know what I was doing at all. And I was playing a warrior, had a helmet on, and I was in the middle of a fight, and they rolled the dice. And the guy knocked the sword out of my hand, and at the same time I rolled a dice, and apparently my character stumbled over a rock at the same time he's being disarmed. He hits the ground and he's on his butt. And then it was my turn, and so the the DM goes, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Throw my helmet at him."
Yes.
Which you can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I threw my helmet at him, rolled a 20, hit him right in between the eyes, and the guy went down. So
Nice.
It's just, for those that are listening, it's all kinds of scenarios that come up. So sometimes it's these big bad moments that Brandon's talking about. Sometimes it's something goofy like, I didn't know what else to do. I'm about to die. So my character, I just threw my helmet at the guy, like, and just knocked him out. It was just stuff like that happens.
And yeah. Oh, I have another story about that.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And this one's not like any kind of like gruesome battle story at all, but the local bard was throwing, he had a birthday party. And the birthday party was being attacked by like griffins, so the flying eagle lion things, and they were specifically trying to attack the bard because they were sent over to crash the party by, well, actually, lo and behold, it was Fantasy Joe Exotic, because he and the bard had beef and they hated each other. And so
I love that.
all the griffins...
Carol,
sorry?
Bardskins.
Carol freaking Baskin, that's the name of the town.
Carol Baskin.
Carol freaking Bardskin.
That's amazing. I'm sorry.
But so all the griffins were going after the bard specifically. And so one of my players who plays a arcane trickster rogue, so basically a rogue who can cast spells, she cast disguise self on herself to look like the bard, except she was standing right in front of the bard. And so they had a moment of like the Spider-Man meme where he's like, "Hey, you're me." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm you." Just as a way to distract the griffins to get them away from him.
Right.
So Yeah, it can be dumb stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's just that's what makes the game so great, is like just it's so creative and imaginative. And even if you can't think of every crazy thing that's going to happen, but then you leave it up to the roll of the dice, and just like the most insane stuff happens. And more times than not, it makes for an incredible story, especially because like no one can really predict where the story goes, and that's what makes it so addicting and exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, I've watched players have dance-offs and where they roll
Yeah.
dice about who could floss better. I mean, it's just crazy.
One night we ended up playing poker for like 2 hours just to make some money in game.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like game within game.
Yep, one of the dumb recurring jokes with our group is, anytime we meet someone new who seems like they might be important, roll for hotness.
Oh God.
So, which is really funny because like
Reminds
we walked in, it's like you see an old wizened dwarf behind the bar. His back is curled with age. Roll for hotness, natural 20. Although he is very, very handsome. This is a daddy dwarf.
Yeah, I introduced in my last session, I introduced a kind of like a pirate who would kind of like settle down in a town and had kind of like taken over the town. It was just like a shady guy. He had a handlebar mustache, the works.
Come on.
And yeah, and everyone immediately, they saw his little like icon that I had made for him on Roll20, and they were like, is he hot? Does he look like Orlando Bloom? And I was like, no. And they're like, well, can he look like Orlando Bloom? And I was like, no.
It's bad resolution. He looks like Tommy Wiseau.
They were like, can he look like Adam Driver? And I was like, fine.
Listen, Adam Driver's daddy. Adam Driver's life. I'll tell you.
Adam Driver with a handlebar mustache.
Oh yeah, I'll take Adam
That's the
Driver.
picture I'm
Yeah,
taking.
He's got to have no shirt, and then his pants got to be up over his belly button like he was in Star Wars. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. That big
Well,
slap.
also the guy that the monk punched in the face and started the bar fight, that guy was shirtless. And at first they saw that guy and they were like, oh, he's shirtless, I'm gonna go talk to him. And I was like, well, he's gonna hit on you, so have fun with that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
You're not gonna like it.
It's so funny when sometimes your characters in your campaign end up reading way too much into things that were just an offhand comment.
Yes.
One group I was in one time, we just became convinced that this one woman in the bar, because she was wearing like a plum sweater with a crimson scarf, that she was someone that we had to keep tabs on. So while our dungeon master is not trying to obviously railroad us, but is gently nudging us back in the direction, it's like, okay, so we need to set up a round the clock watch on her and her house and who she talks to. And it was literally just like the greengrocer's wife. This poor woman.
Which in
Yeah,
the
so
game, right? Just this idea
Yeah.
of these people watching her, and she's panicking, and she's starting to figure it out.
Uh-huh.
That would be. I want to see it from her perspective.
yeah, so to whoever's listening to this, so you're hearing all these stories, and then let's go back to our initial conversation when we were talking about how D&D is not a satanic cult.
Yeah.
This is what
Maybe
D&D
a cult,
is.
but it's a fun one. No, just kidding. Yeah, it really is, just a shared story. The Savannah and other game masters and dungeon masters are kind of guiding it, but if they're judicious enough and they're open enough and they know their group well enough, it can be a really fun experience. Sometimes you get ones who are very much, it's like, well, according to this page and this subsection, we like to call them rules lawyers. They can really just take the joy out of it. I started a campaign with a group one time, and it was for a different game, and I wasn't as familiar with it. And I said, okay, well, can I take that? It's like, well, sure, but that puts you over 300 pounds of gear, so you're going to be heavily enameled. So I mean, as long as you don't mind being half a mile behind the rest of us every day collectively and never catching up again, yeah, sure, you can take that. I was like, you could have just said no. I didn't need I appreciate snark, but when I'm genuinely asking a question, I'd appreciate some sincerity.
Yeah.
Weird thought.
And so the most important thing is that everyone at the table has fun, right? And so, that's what everyone is there for at the end of the day. And the rules, there are a lot of them. And they're pretty intimidating sometimes, but the rules don't matter as long as you're having fun.
To quote Barbosa, they're more like guidelines.
And and like, honestly, I've been DMing for a year, and I just realized that I've been doing what we call short rests wrong for a year. Yeah. and like how you heal during a short rest, which is like an hour to a few hours, versus a long rest, which is like 8 hours. I had been doing that wrong, and I was like, whoops, oh well. You know, we've all been having fun, and I didn't kill anyone on accident because I was doing it wrong. So like, you know, no harm, no foul.
Right.
Yeah.
We're all having fun. It doesn't matter. That's
Yeah.
all that matters at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to mention before, when you'd said, Eric, about when you'd asked about, you know, there's 6 or 7 different people, how do you manage those expectations? One thing that a group that I started with recently did that I thought was really great. When we began, they asked, okay, so what are you expecting and what do you want out of this campaign? Because some people just come in, they want to play the big dumb guy who hits things and can just fade in the background. They don't want to play their character. That's not what they're about, and that's fine. You have some guys that, you know, want to find out how they can create the most damage, whether that be through spells or physical action. You know, they'll play their character a little bit, but they're really just trying to see how much, you know, how much power they can pack in their punch. And then there's some people who get so into it that they draw up their own artwork. They have years of backstory. They've written a journal for this character. They can tell you the names of their siblings. Same. Savannah and I are both, she started pointing her fingers at herself, and I have to agree. And it's just, so having that conversation from the beginning is just a great way to kind of manage expectations from the jump, because some people, you know, aren't necessarily thinking it's like, oh, I can't wait, we're all going to be so into this, and they're not really considering it's like, well, some people just want to come in and smash and grab, and that's fine too. It's just great to know that from the jump, so you're not alienating some members of your campaign.
Right, that makes sense. And the idea of approaching it where everybody has fun, different levels for different people, I think that's probably a good way of putting it.
For sure.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's really smart. So I'm looking at the time. We're wrapping up. We've flown through this so fast. But, you know, one last thing before we go, I do want to ask you guys. Say I'm someone who's never played D&D or never played roll GURPS or whatever it may be. How do I get involved with this? I mean, just picture someone who's never done it before and doesn't know how to get started. But based on what we've heard today, they're like, hey, I'll give this a go. How do we handle that? Where do we go to kind of get connected with people that can?
Yeah, so honestly, if you don't have anyone to play with, you can, you know, get involved by reaching out on, you know, social media sites. Reddit is a big one where a lot of people look for D&D groups. Roll20, the website that I use for part of our games, they also have a way that you can, you know, ask about games that people are running and stuff. And there's a multitude of resources like that. You also can just, you know, you don't even need to buy the books starting out. I don't even own the books. I actually just only recently got the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's 3 core rule books. I only have this one. And you definitely don't need the rule books to play. There's you know, the basic rules online. You can Google everything. Yeah, the basic rules are online. A really helpful resource, an official resource, is the website D&D Beyond, which also, you know, teaches you how to make a character, and it has the basic rules and stuff. The easiest way to get into it is just start a game, find some friends who are interested in playing, and you all just figure it out together. And there's, you know, a million resources online to help you figure out how to play or how to DM or GM. You can listen to live play D&D podcasts and shows. There's a whole lot of them. And they're really helpful. Honestly, I didn't really figure out how to play half of D&D until I listened to those. And then I was like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it.
Right.
And just kind of figured it out from there.
Right.
Yeah, I would just kind of second what Savannah said. In today's world, with all of the resources we have on social media and the internet, if you want to play, you will find a way to play. Like she said, Reddit is a great place to start. There are other, I think Roll20 has a forum side to it as well that you can usually find. And Roll20 is a great platform, not just Dungeons and Dragons, but a litany of any kind of tabletop RPG you can think of. Sci-fi based ones, you know, modern day, more dramatic and actiony type ones. You can find something to your tastes. And, you know, like I said, if you want to find it, you will. You don't have to invest anything eventually you will probably pick up a dice addiction. It happens, don't worry. And there is always like some cool book on Kickstarter that you won't mind shelling out $50 to $90 for. So, you know, there are side effects that you might not expect at first.
Definitely side effects.
and you know, don't be discouraged. It is a time commitment. Just realize that my friends and I, we get together about once a week and we try to play for at least 3 to 4 hours. Now that sounds like a lot of time, but once you get going, it really isn't. But it is a time commitment that you have to make. And expect that, you know, you're not just going to drop in maybe once a month or as your schedule allows. This will be something that you schedule because you're making a commitment to other people's time, and you want to respect that. It could take anywhere from a few weeks to a few years. So just have some kind of time expectation set up if that's really important to you. You can play via Zoom. There are ones that are entirely text-based where you're literally just like typing and reading the entire time. There's something for any level of comfort that you have. If you want to just watch a campaign, you know, look up Critical Role is one of the most famous ones that are kind of played on YouTube. But there are a multitude of audio and video podcasts. Greetings Adventurers, The Adventure Zone, like Savannah mentioned earlier, Critical Role are 3 of the most famous ones. Nerd Poker with Brian Posehn's Nerd Poker is one of my favorite ones. But there's just, if you're really interested, reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer questions. But if you really want to get into it, it's not hard. It's just a Google away.
Yeah, honestly. What else was I going to say? I forgot what I was going to say. And like just, you know, if you want to play and you find some friends who want to play, just, you know, if your friends are on the same page as you, just start. You know, there's nothing holding you back. Don't be afraid of like, oh, I don't know the rules, or, oh, because I do have a lot of people who, you know, I talk about how I am a DM and how much I love D&D on the internet, and people are like, oh my gosh, like I just started DMing, or like I really want to play D&D, but I'm so intimidated. It's like, just do it. You know, as long as you're having fun and you're not playing with toxic people. Unfortunately, they're out there, but you know, no one's gonna judge you for it. Like it's all in good fun. We're all, you know, talking in silly voices, pretending to be elves or gnomes or halflings or whatever. Like, just there's no, you know,
Right.
just do whatever you want. Just have fun. Just, you know, don't be afraid to make that leap. And it is a time commitment. What I was going to say is, you know, it also kind of, being able to commit to the time also shows a level of respect to the DM, because we spend so much time planning and thinking about the story. And, you know, it is kind of a hobby for me. And it is just a really awesome, like, creative outlet, but it is also work. It's not always fun. Sometimes you're, you know, crunching numbers and typing.
Making playlists and figure out the boiling point of gold is, you know, time consuming.
Yeah, you end up down some weird rabbit holes for a long time because you have to figure out something. But I mean, just like crunching numbers, making sure you don't kill your players on accident. You know, that stuff all takes time, and it's not always super, super fun, but we do it because we love our players and because we love the game. So, you know, we appreciate all the players who, you know, make time for the game and show up and enjoy it as much as the DMs do.
Yeah. Well, I heard it once said that nothing worth doing is easy. And sometimes, you know, when you're as a DM, you have more responsibility than anybody else because you are creating the world that everybody gets to play in. And so, yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Savannah. That was really cool and a lot of fun. We absolutely loved your stories. And thank you for coming on to our podcast. Thank you so much. And
yeah, I had a great time.
Oh, good. I'm glad. We hope to have you back when we can. So, well, I've been Eric, and we've been joined by our other hosts, my best friend Brandon, my mom, her name is Sandy, and we've been joined also by Savannah. Well, wherever you are in that big wide world, just remember, it can always get worse. We'll see y'all later. Bye.
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 Bye.